The morning mist clung to the grounds of Windsor Castle like a shroud, fitting for the somber atmosphere that had settled over the royal family. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood at the tall window of their private quarters, watching the early dawn break through the clouds. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her morning tea, the delicate china cup rattling against its saucer. Behind her, William sat on the edge of their bed, his head in his hands, shoulders heavy with the weight of responsibility and grief. The news had come 3 days earlier, delivered by a palace aide whose face had been pale with the gravity of his message. Queen Elizabeth II, the beloved matriarch who had guided the monarchy for over 70 years, had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The family had been summoned to Balmoral Castle in Scotland, but despite their rushed journey, they had arrived too late. The Queen, who had been a constant source of strength and wisdom for William throughout his life, had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Catherine turned from the window and walked quietly to where her husband sat. Without words, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. William looked up at her, his blue eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and sorrow. They had been married for over a decade, and in all that time Catherine had never seen him look so vulnerable, so lost. The man who would one day be king seemed in that moment like a young boy who had lost his grandmother. "The children are asking questions," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the room. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been shielded from much of the immediate chaos, but they were intelligent children who sensed the change in the household's atmosphere. George especially. He knows something important has happened. William nodded slowly, running his hands through his hair. At 40, he had always known this day would come, but knowledge and emotional preparation were two entirely different things. The Queen had been more than just his sovereign. She had been his confidant, his guide through the complexities of royal life, and one of the few people who truly understood the burden he would inherit. The palace corridors buzzed with activity as staff members moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for the monumental task ahead. Protocol dictated every movement, every announcement, every gesture that would follow. Yet amidst all the formal procedures, William and Catherine found themselves grappling with very human emotions that no amount of royal training could fully prepare them for. Catherine remembered her first meeting with the Queen, years before she and William had married. She had been terrified, a commoner entering the most exclusive family in the world. But the Queen had been unexpectedly warm, asking about Catherine's family and showing genuine interest in her university studies. Over the years, their relationship had grown from polite formality to genuine affection, with the Queen often seeking Catherine's opinion on family matters and praising her dedication to charitable causes. "She believed in us," William said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Even when the press was harsh, even when people questioned whether our relationship would last, she never wavered in her support." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, and Catherine felt her own eyes fill with tears. The weight of what lay ahead seemed overwhelming. William was now second in line to the throne, with his father Charles having immediately ascended to become King Charles III. The dynamics of their entire family structure had shifted overnight. Catherine, who had spent years learning to navigate her role as a senior royal, now faced an even greater level of scrutiny and responsibility. Outside their private quarters, the world was already changing. News broadcasts around the globe were covering the Queen's death, and tributes were pouring in from world leaders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by her 7-decade reign. The Union Jack flew at half-mast over Buckingham Palace, and crowds had begun gathering outside the royal residences, leaving flowers and messages of condolence. But inside the castle walls, the royal family was dealing with grief in the most human way possible. Charles, now king, was managing his own sorrow while immediately taking on the constitutional duties of the monarchy. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense approach, was coordinating with palace officials to ensure the funeral arrangements would honor their mother's wishes. Prince Andrew and Prince Edward were supporting their brother while managing their own grief and that of their children. Catherine found herself thinking about the conversations she had shared with the Queen in recent months. During their last private tea together just 6 weeks earlier, the Queen had seemed reflective, speaking about legacy and the importance of family unity during times of change. At the time, Catherine had assumed these were simply the musings of an elderly woman looking back on her long life. Now, those words seemed prophetic. "She wanted us to be strong for each other," Catherine told William, remembering that afternoon conversation. She said that the monarchy's greatest strength had always been its ability to adapt while maintaining its core values of service and duty. William stood and walked to the window where Catherine had been standing earlier. The castle grounds were beginning to show signs of increased activity as security was heightened, and preparations began for what would undoubtedly be one of the largest state funerals in modern history. He thought about the last time he had spoken with his grandmother, a brief phone call just days before her death. She had asked about the children's school activities and had laughed at a story about Louis's latest mischievous adventure. The realization that there would be no more such calls, no more quiet conversations about family matters, no more of her steady presence during difficult times, hit William with fresh waves of grief. Yet alongside the sorrow was a deep sense of gratitude for the relationship they had shared and the lessons she had taught him about leadership, compassion, and the true meaning of public service. As the morning progressed, palace officials began arriving to brief the family on the immediate procedures that needed to be followed. The Queen's death would trigger Operation London Bridge, the detailed plan that had been decades in the making for this exact moment. Every aspect of the next 10 days would be carefully orchestrated, from the official announcements to the lying in state, culminating in a funeral that would be watched by millions around the world. Catherine listened to the briefings while also keeping part of her attention on William, watching for signs that the pressure might be becoming too much. She had learned over their years together that her husband internalized stress in ways that weren't always immediately apparent. Her role as his partner had evolved far beyond what she could have imagined when they first met at university. But she had never felt the weight of that responsibility more keenly than she did now. The couple knew that in the days ahead, they would need to be pillars of strength for their children, for the extended royal family, and for a nation in mourning. The Queen's death marked not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a new chapter in British history, one in which William and Catherine would play increasingly central roles. As palace staff continued their preparations around them, William and Catherine held each other close, drawing strength from their partnership while preparing to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The girl who had once been nervous about meeting the Queen and the boy who had grown up knowing he would one day be king were now united in their determination to honor the memory of the remarkable woman who had guided them both with such grace and wisdom. The great halls of Westminster Abbey had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies, but never had they felt quite so charged with emotion as they did on this September morning. Catherine stood beside William in the front row of mourners, her black dress and hat perfectly appropriate for the solemnity of the occasion, yet her face betrayed the deep personal loss she felt. The Queen's coffin, draped in the royal standard and topped with the imperial state crown, lay before the altar surrounded by thousands of flowers from around the world. William's jaw was set with determination, but Catherine could see the subtle tremor in his hands as he held the order of service. She gently placed her gloved hand over his, a small gesture that spoke volumes about their partnership and mutual support. Around them, world leaders, heads of state, and members of royal families from across the globe had gathered to pay their respects to the woman who had been a constant presence on the world stage for longer than most could remember. The past week had been a whirlwind of carefully orchestrated events. The Queen's coffin had lain in state at Westminster Hall, where hundreds of thousands of mourners had queued for hours to pay their final respects. Catherine and William had joined other family members in standing vigil beside the coffin, a deeply moving tradition that had connected them personally with the outpouring of public grief. During those quiet hours of vigil, Catherine had reflected on the conversations she'd shared with the Queen about motherhood and raising children in the public eye. The Queen had often spoken about the challenge of balancing royal duties with family life, sharing stories from her own experience raising 4 children while serving as monarch. Those conversations had taken on new significance as Catherine watched George, Charlotte, and Louis struggle to understand why their great-grandmother would never again join them for afternoon tea or listen to their stories about school. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the service with words that seemed to echo through the ancient stones of the abbey. William's face remained composed, but Catherine noticed how he gripped the edge of the pew during the opening hymn, his knuckles white with tension. She thought about the private moment they had shared just that morning, when William had broken down briefly while helping George with his tie, overwhelmed by the realization that his eldest son was now experiencing his first major loss. As the service continued, Catherine's mind wandered to the immediate aftermath of the Queen's death. The children had been told gently, with William and Catherine working together to find age-appropriate ways to explain what had happened. George, at 9 years old, had asked profound questions about what it meant to be king and whether his father was sad about becoming next in line to the throne. Charlotte, ever empathetic, had wanted to know if they could still visit the Queen in heaven. Louis, the youngest, had simply asked when Gangan would be coming back to play. The weight of supporting their children through their grief while managing their own sorrow and increased royal responsibilities had been enormous. Catherine found herself grateful for the lessons in resilience that the Queen had modeled throughout her reign. Even in her final years, faced with personal scandals within the family and global challenges, the Queen had maintained her composure and continued her duties with unwavering dedication. During the service, when the congregation sang, "The Lord's my shepherd," Catherine noticed William's voice catch on the familiar words. This had been one of the Queen's favorite hymns, often requested at family gatherings and private services. The melody carried memories of Christmas services at Sandringham, Easter celebrations at Windsor, and countless other family occasions where the Queen's faith had been a source of strength for everyone around her. The reading from the Book of Revelation spoke of a new heaven and a new earth, words that seemed particularly poignant given the transformation the royal family and the nation were experiencing. Catherine thought about the conversations she'd overheard between William and his father in recent days, as they worked together to understand their new roles and responsibilities. The relationship between father and son had deepened considerably during this period of shared grief and transition. Behind them sat Princess Anne, stoic and dignified as always, but Catherine had witnessed her moments of vulnerability in the family's private quarters. The Queen's only daughter had been her closest confidant in recent years, and the loss was particularly acute for her. Prince Andrew and Prince Edward sat with their families, all struggling with their own grief while supporting each other through the most public farewell imaginable. As the service progressed toward the final hymn, Catherine became acutely aware of the cameras trained on the royal family, broadcasting their grief to millions around the world. She had long ago learned to compartmentalize her private emotions when in public, but today the usual barriers seemed more fragile. The Queen had been not just a sovereign and grandmother-in-law, but a mentor who had guided Catherine through her transformation from university student to future Queen consort. The most powerful moment came during the 2-minute silence that followed the last post. In that profound quiet, with only the distant sounds of London beyond the Abbey walls, Catherine felt the full weight of the moment. This was truly the end of an era, not just for the monarchy, but for the world. The Queen had been a constant presence through decades of change, wars, celebrations, and challenges. Her passing marked a turning point that would reshape the royal family forever. William's composure finally cracked slightly during the national anthem, sung now for the first time in his memory with the words, "God save the King," in honor of his father. Catherine saw a single tear slide down his cheek, quickly wiped away, but in that moment she witnessed the full reality of what had changed hitting him. He was no longer just a prince. He was now heir to a throne that felt simultaneously more real and more daunting than ever before. The committal service that followed at St. George's Chapel in Windsor was smaller and more intimate, attended only by close family and the Queen's household staff. Here, away from the global audience, the family could grieve more openly. Catherine watched as William placed his hand on his father's shoulder during the final prayers, a gesture that spoke to their strengthened bond and shared understanding of the responsibilities they now carried. As earth was scattered onto the coffin and the Queen's coffin was slowly lowered into the royal vault, Catherine felt William's hand seek hers. In that simple touch, she felt not just his grief, but his gratitude for her presence beside him during this most difficult time. They had weathered many storms together over their years of marriage, but this moment would forever mark a new chapter in their lives and their service to the crown. The private burial later that evening was limited to the immediate family. Standing in the quiet of Frogmore Gardens as the Queen was laid to rest beside Prince Philip, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary legacy of service and duty that had been passed down to the next generation. The woman who had dedicated her life to her country and commonwealth had finally found peace, but her influence would continue to guide those she left behind. Walking back to the castle in the fading light, William and Catherine knew that while they had said goodbye to the Queen, they were also stepping forward into roles that would define the rest of their lives. The grace they had witnessed in her living would need to continue in their service to the crown and to the people they would one day lead. 6 months after the funeral, Catherine stood in the same Windsor Castle room where she had first learned of the Queen's death, but everything had changed. The morning light streamed through the windows differently now, and the weight of their new responsibilities had settled into their daily routines like furniture in a house they were still learning to call home. William entered quietly behind her, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a small ritual they had developed to start each day together before the demands of royal duties consumed their attention. The transformation in their lives had been both gradual and dramatic. William now carried the title of Prince of Wales, a role that came with increased constitutional responsibilities and a deeper involvement in state affairs. Catherine, as the Princess of Wales, had found herself thrust into a level of public scrutiny that made her previous royal duties seem modest by comparison. Yet both had grown into their expanded roles with a grace that would have made the Queen proud. "The children have stopped asking when we're going back to our old house," Catherine said softly, referring to their move to a larger residence befitting William's new position. The transition had been hardest on Louis, who at 4 years old struggled to understand why everything had to change just because great-grandmother had gone to heaven. William nodded, setting down the coffee cups and moving to stand beside his wife. "George asked me yesterday if being Prince of Wales means he'll be king sooner," he said with a slight smile. Their eldest son had shown a remarkable maturity in processing the changes to their family dynamic, often asking thoughtful questions that revealed his growing understanding of his own future destiny. The past months had brought unexpected gifts alongside the grief. William's relationship with his father had deepened considerably as they worked together on matters of state. King Charles III had shown remarkable strength in assuming his new role, but he had also been generous in sharing the emotional burden of transition with his eldest son. The weekly private dinners they now shared had become a source of comfort and wisdom for both men. Catherine had discovered strengths within herself that she hadn't known existed. The Queen's death had coincided with several international crises that required careful diplomatic navigation. Catherine found herself hosting foreign dignitaries, representing the crown at state functions, and speaking publicly about issues that mattered deeply to her with an authority she had never possessed before. One particular evening stood out in her memory. She had been representing the royal family at a charity gala for mental health awareness, one of her longtime passions, when an elderly woman approached her during the reception. The woman, a Holocaust survivor, had spoken about meeting the Queen decades earlier, and how that brief encounter had given her hope during a difficult period in her life. "Your presence here tonight reminds me of her," the woman had said simply. "There's the same kindness in your eyes." That moment had crystallized something for Catherine. She realized that the Queen's legacy wasn't just about duty and protocol. It was about the countless small moments of human connection that had defined her reign. The challenge now was to honor that legacy while finding their own authentic way of serving. William had faced his own moments of profound realization. During a visit to a military base where he had once served, he met with families of soldiers who had died in service. A young widow, not much older than Catherine, had thanked him for his presence and then said something that stayed with him for weeks afterward. "The Queen always understood our sacrifices because she had made her own. I can see you understand, too." The weight of representing something larger than themselves had always been part of their royal role, but it felt different now, more immediate, more personal, and somehow more meaningful. The Queen's death had removed a buffer between them and the full reality of their future responsibilities, but it had also connected them more directly to the people they served. Their children had adapted with the resilience that young people often display in the face of change. George had begun showing a genuine interest in the constitutional aspects of monarchy, often surprising his tutors with perceptive questions about governance and leadership. Charlotte had channeled her grief into art, creating drawings and paintings that captured her memories of the Queen in ways that brought tears to adult eyes. Louis had simply accepted the changes with the matter-of-fact adaptability of a young child, though he still occasionally asked when they could go back to their small house. The most challenging adjustment had been learning to live with the increased public attention. Every appearance, every expression, every choice of clothing was scrutinized and interpreted as meaningful. Catherine had always been conscious of this reality, but the intensity had increased significantly with her new title. She found herself relying more heavily on the lessons the Queen had taught her about maintaining composure under pressure while remaining genuine in her interactions with the public. One afternoon, while reviewing speeches for upcoming engagements, Catherine discovered a handwritten note tucked inside a portfolio the Queen had left for her. The message was brief, but profound. "Remember that our greatest strength lies not in appearing perfect, but in showing our humanity while serving something greater than ourselves. The people need to see that we care, not that we are untouchable." This note had become a guiding principle for both William and Catherine as they navigated their new roles. They made conscious efforts to be more accessible during public engagements, spending extra time with people who had waited hours to meet them, and speaking more openly about their own experiences of grief and growth. The first Christmas without the Queen had been particularly difficult. The family traditions that had centered around her presence at Sandringham felt hollow and strange. But it was during that holiday season that William and Catherine began to understand how they might honor her memory while creating new traditions for their own family and the monarchy. They had decided to host a special Christmas gathering for palace staff and their families, something the Queen had done privately for decades, but which had never received public attention. Catherine had insisted that the event be filmed and shared, not for publicity, but because she believed people needed to see the human side of royal life during this time of transition. The footage of William playing football with staff children while Catherine helped in the kitchen preparing traditional Christmas pudding had been broadcast around the world. It showed a side of the royal family that felt both respectful of tradition and genuinely contemporary. The Queen would have approved of the balance they had struck between dignity and accessibility. As spring arrived and the first anniversary of the Queen's death approached, William and Catherine had begun planning a memorial service that would celebrate her life rather than simply mourning her death. They wanted an event that would capture the joy she had brought to her role and the positive impact she had made on countless lives. Standing together in their morning routine, looking out at grounds that now felt like home, they reflected on how much they had grown in such a short time. The grief remained, softened but not eliminated by the passage of time, but alongside it had grown a deeper understanding of their purpose and a stronger partnership forged by shared challenges. "She would be proud of how we've handled everything," William said quietly, voicing what they both believed, but rarely said aloud. Catherine nodded, thinking of all the ways the Queen's influence continued to guide their decisions. "I think she knew we were ready, even when we didn't feel ready ourselves." As they prepared to begin another day of royal duties, they carried with them the lessons learned through grief and the strength discovered in supporting each other through unprecedented change. The Queen's death had marked the end of an era, but it had also revealed the grace and resilience that would define the next chapter of the British monarchy. In learning to say goodbye with dignity, William and Catherine had found their own voices as leaders and partners, ready to serve with the same dedication that had made the Queen so beloved, while bringing their own authentic approach to the ancient institution they had inherited. Their silent farewell to the Queen had indeed left a permanent mark on royal history, not just because of the sorrow it represented, but because of the strength and unity it had revealed in those who remained to carry on her legacy.